Hi, I'm Ron, and welcome back to PopSicle, where I talk about popular culture, science, and everything in between. This is going to be the first episode of world building for PopSicle, and here I'm going to talk about the importance of stars and thinking about what stars your planets are orbiting around if you want to write good science fiction that takes into account the science of stars and the energy that they give out to planets to sustain life on those planets. Why is it important to start with stars? Of course, when you're doing world building, you don't have to go all the way to the origin of a planet and the origin of life on a planet based on what star it has. You can proceed, of course, with your story, uh, being at a particular stage of the evolution of intelligent life already, and then just maybe have some throwaway references to the type of star that your sci-fi planet has. But of course, if you want to have a stronger basis for what types of life are living on and evolving on your planet, you might want to look at what type of star it has. The star is the source of energy for life on your planet. That's the most important thing. But it also, affects many different processes like tides. Because while the moon of Earth, is the one that exerts more effects on our tides being closer to the Earth. The Sun also does that. And of course, you have the solar flares uh, affecting not only the evolution of life on a planet, but also communication of civilizations that have reached a particular level. As those of you who have read the book The Three-Body Problem by Cixin would know. Those of you who follow a lot of science fiction and probably the study of extraterrestrial life would have heard of the Drake equation, which is meant to give us an estimate of how many intelligent alien civilizations are out there that we share the universe with. If you look at the Drake equation, which is shown here, you see that the first part of the equation refers to the availability of a star. That's how important it is. Without a host or parent star to give energy to a planet and to give stability to the planet in a solar system or in a stellar system, then there couldn't be life. Unless, of course, you talk about life that exists in the Gulf of Space, which a lot of science fiction have also, like the Black Cloud, for example, have also tackled. Like you're talking about interstellar uh, gaseous or ionic life forms that don't have a particular form. But when we talk about planets hosting life, planets being habitable, we have to talk about the type of star that the planet is orbiting about. Now, there are many ways to categorize stars, but there is one that is of particular importance in habitability of a planet, and that is the stellar classification, meaning classification in terms of the brightness, the luminosity, the color, and ultimately also the age of a star. I mean, the life expectancy of a star, how long it can live. You see in the typical spectral classification schemes that it ranges from O to M. O being the largest and brightest and bluest stars, and M being the shortest lived, smallest, and least bright of the stars, also the coolest. Now, these have a lot of implications, particularly with the habitable zone. A brief note on the habitable zone. This is essentially that zone around a star where we believe there could be liquid water on the surface of a particular planet. Why is this important? We know from basic science how important water is as an ingredient for life. We believe that universally water, liquid water in particular, is important because it's a known medium for a lot of chemical reactions and it's a very stable compound that forms molecules with other substances or compounds with other substances. And there are many other properties of water that allow it to sustain life. So, whenever we try to look for signatures of life on Earth, typically, while we look for other gases as well, like phosphine, which is the gas that was found by a team of scientists in Venus very, very recently, which could suggest life, very exciting. We also look for water. However, it is worth noting that a lot of recent evidence has suggested that we might not necessarily have to look for liquid H2O on the surface of planets to be able to say that they potentially host life. We cannot absolutely rule out planets just because they don't have surface liquid H2O. First and foremost, there are many scientists who believe that other liquid media like liquid methane or liquid ammonia can sustain weird biochemistries that we are not familiar with. But even if you're talking about H2O, it doesn't have to be a surface ocean. It can be water generated via tidal heating or radioactive decay in the core of the planet. So we won't see signatures of it. Or it may be water that exists in compounds with various chemicals, the same way that water exists with various salts as seawater on our planet. But of course, it's always exciting to see water on planets or moons because where there is water, whether frozen or in a gaseous state, there could be life. Now, having said that, we go back to the concept of the habitable zone. So, the primary definition of a habitable zone, again, is that there could be liquid water in that range. So, it shouldn't be too close to the star that all of that water will be boiled away, but not too far from the star that, number one, that water will be permanently frozen, or number two, there won't be water at all, or number three, it's so far that there will not be enough energy reaching the planet to sustain life. So O stars, of course, being the largest and brightest, have the largest or widest potential habitable zone. And it stands to reason that the M stars, being the smallest and least bright, are the ones with the smallest or narrowest habitable zone. Our star, our own star, the Sun, which is a G type of star, is somewhere in the middle. It has a sizable enough habitable zone, and we're lucky enough to be on a planet that is within the habitable zone of the G star. A habitable zone being so far from the host star could be problematic in the sense that there may not be enough spectral energy or stellar energy reaching the planet to allow for the formation of highly complex life forms. There would probably be life of very simple forms, but in terms of complexity, there might be a limitation because there's not too much energy reaching the planet. And there is another reason why O planets may not be good candidates for intelligent life, and we will discuss that later. Now, the complexity of an M star hosting life on any of its planets is on a different level altogether. It's a problem of the habitable zone being very narrow. So the planet, for it to sustain life and liquid water, has to be very, very close to the host star. So close, in fact, that it will be tidally locked. What does tidal locking mean? That means that the planet is fixed in its orbit and it is not rotating on its own axis. Meaning that the same side that faces the star at one time is the same side that will always face it. The same way that our moon is tidally locked. We're always seeing the same side of the moon. The Earth is not tidally locked with its star because we are far enough. So what does that mean? That means that there is only one side of a planet revolving around the host M-class star that is facing that star all the time, and so it is bathed with all that heat and light, whereas the other side is permanently dark. That would of course mean that most of the life that would be sustained by very bright light would be found on the surface that's facing the star, whereas those that are more tolerant of very dark conditions would evolve on the dark side. Now, it doesn't mean that there will be no heat at all on the dark side and it will be permanently frozen. Because of the great abundance of heat on the light side, it is very likely that that thermal gradient will drive a lot of heat via the air, for example, via gases, to the dark side also, thus potentially supplying it with life-giving heat. So the dark side doesn't have to be frozen. However, it will be dark. So whatever life evolves, there has to be life that doesn't require a lot of sunlight or sunlight at all. So autotrophic organisms, or organisms that are able to produce their food, like the plants here on Earth or the bacteria here on Earth, shouldn't be overly complex that they would require a lot of light. Maybe they will be chemosynthetic organisms instead, meaning organisms that are able to produce their own food not with sunlight, but with inorganic minerals like iron sulfides, methane, ammonia, and several other rich components of their habitat. Whereas those organisms living on the light side of a planet revolving around an M star have to be very, very tolerant of high light and heat conditions. They probably have to be very brightly colored so as to reflect a lot of that sunlight off. However, given that the light is relatively weak coming from an M star, it is also possible that even on the light side, the plants or the organisms are not getting enough stellar light for their energy. So since they have to absorb more of that, they might be of darker colors instead. It stands to reason that a planet revolving around a very weak star would have dark colors, perhaps even black, to be able to absorb as much of that light as possible. So it would be very, very fun to play around with the types of plants and organisms in terms of color and appearance and behavior. For instance, if you have a planet that's revolving around a very weak star, you might have plants that are black, that are orienting themselves perpendicular to the sunlight so that they're absorbing a lot of that sunlight on their surface area. And so you may have plants that really follow the starlight. And the animals could also be doing the same. Now, there's another major consideration to make when populating your planets and thinking about the host star. This has to do with the age or the life expectancy of the star. O stars, for example, typically do not live beyond 10 million years. Now, think about the Earth. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and not until 200,000 years ago did intelligent life in the form of Homo sapiens evolve. If we are to argue high levels of intelligence or certain levels of intelligence in our other primate ancestors, then we're talking here 1 million years ago, maximum probably of 2 million years ago. So given that, it took more than 4 billion years for intelligent life to evolve on Earth. O stars don't live past 10 million years. So that's problematic in terms of the possibility of intelligent life evolving on planets revolving around O stars. Yes, there could be life, definitely, but probably not to the extent that intelligent life can form. Although, bear in mind that on Earth, it took 600 million years at least for the most primitive life forms to evolve based on the evidence that we have. Meanwhile, an M star, which could live up to 100 billion years, will have definitely enough time to allow for the evolution of intelligent life. G stars, like our own, typically live up to 10 billion years. So the sun is actually halfway through its life expectancy. If that scares you, you don't have to worry, because that's another 5 or so billion years, and you definitely won't be alive by the time the sun dies. Now, based on these two things, the size of the habitable zone and the life expectancy of the star, many biologists believe that the prime candidate for life are K-class stars, because they have a wide enough habitable zone, wider than M stars, although narrower, of course, than G stars, but they live long enough to potentially allow for evolution of intelligent life. They may live up to 40 billion years, which is more than enough, given what we've seen on Earth. That could see the rise and fall of multiple intelligent civilizations. One of the planets that interests biologists is Kepler 442, because it is in the Goldilocks zone of a K-star, which again, certain biologists are arguing would be the best stars to look at if you want to look for habitable planets. The other great thing about K-stars is that there are so many of them out there. There are 3 times as many K-stars as there are G-stars in our own galaxy. And so there are so many candidates to look at. Many of the candidates that we've found so far are supergiants, much larger than the Earth, or gas giants, because these are the easiest to find. Of course, if you want to go more complex, you can go into binary star systems and then go even further and look at three-star systems, like in the three-body problem, where the trisolarians have evolved to be able to go into uh, extreme hibernation and be able to bounce back later on after the major ecological disturbance of three stars being aligned and basically ripping life apart on the planet. It's going to be much more complex if you're talking about life on planets revolving around stars that are part of a binary or three-star system. But it's possible. There will be just more considerations of pressure differences and gravity and all of that. Biologists are always excited when we discover potentially habitable planets. Just in 2017, we learned that there are 7 planets orbiting around the TRAPPIST-1 system, which is just a little over 39 light years away. That's relatively close. Of course, that's still far enough away that we don't have the current technology to allow us to go there anytime soon. But among those 7 planets, there are 3 candidates in the habitable zone, with planet E being identified as the one that is most likely to be habitable. So that's just a short overview of how you can use stars and their spectral classifications and their life expectancies to determine if your planet can hold life, especially intelligent life. Maybe in future videos, I will explore these in more detail because there's so much more to be said about this aspect of world building. If you enjoyed this video and would want to see more in the future, please don't forget to subscribe to PopScicle. See you soon!